Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. Father, we just come to you this morning. We come here for you. Would you be near us? God, I pray for those. 1 Kings 20 talks a story about, you say, they think that your God's just the God of the hills, but I'll show to them I'm also the God of the valleys. It's a literal situation in that story, but that speaks to our lives, that you are the God of our joys and our successes, but you're the God in our weaknesses and our failures and every spot in between. And so, God, I pray for those that come with heavy hearts, with bad news, with diagnoses and work conflicts and relational troubles and everything in between, and those that are celebrating, those that have been dominating at work and their relationships are awesome and everything's working out. God, we still need you. You're the God of all of it. We thank you that we're here and we get to sing and worship and hear your word, and the worship's great and the message is good and the community's wonderful. But God, we're here not for those things. We're here for you. So would you meet us? Meet every person. Wherever we're at, you know us. We give you this time. We're here for you. And so would you shine your face on us, God? Just let us know you're here. We ask all of this in your matchless name. And all God's people said, amen, amen. You guys can grab a seat. I want to say thank you, John and Robin and Tim and Eric and Philip. John, if you didn't know, does everything in the church. And just, how many years did you say that since you'd led on a Sunday? Is it 12?
Yeah, probably.
10, 12 years since you've led on a Sunday, and you just do a great job. And if you don't know John yet, he's one of our elders, but his heart for this community and for you, for his family, it just pours out everything that he does. So thank you guys. Thank you for supporting him and all of that stuff. It is great too, and I want to say this about Pat and Terry. I've been talking to Pat for the last year. We meet every other week. If you're new, Pat's our worship pastor. He has a long beard. You can't miss him. And I've been talking to him, and I'm saying, hey, I love that you bring your energy, and, they work so hard leading up to every Sunday. And I go, but you need rest. And I say to Pat all the time, I'm like, I want to do this with you for a while. And if you don't take breaks, I don't know if you're, and he's like, no, I'm fine. And every week, if you've been here, he shows up. Brings us energy, and I'm like, where did you get that energy from? How do you have so much? And so he finally was like, all right, I'm going to take a Sunday off. And I'm like, yes, please. So they're camping right now, and just a good thing. He's taken off less Sundays in the time that he's been here than I have. He's just so consistent and diligent and has done a great thing with our worship ministry, part of their team, you know that. But I have a couple announcements, and we have a really fun announcement. If you're new or feel new, they'll have a slide on the screen. You can scan the QR code. If you don't know how to do that, you open your camera app and tap the QR code on there. I had to learn that a couple years ago. There's also cards physically available that you can fill out. We'd love to know that you're here and answer any questions you have. Say thank you for worshiping. With that, in 2 weeks, we're starting our life track. It's 3 weeks where you get to know a little bit about our church, a little bit about you, and then how you could get involved if you believe this is the church that God's calling you to be a part of as one of his sons or daughters. And we would love for you to participate. We already have 8 or 9 adults signed up and so a handful of kids. It'll be here on Sunday mornings at 9, right before service at one of the cinemas down the hallway. And I would say this, if you've been a part of the community for a while and you haven't done this course, we'd love for you to do it. One, because we'd love to get some feedback from people that have been apart for a while. But two, we share about some of the core things about who my wife and I are and who this church is. And also, we talk about how God's wired you. And maybe you've attended church and you're even serving, but you've never really thought about that. I would encourage you, implore you to sign up and be a part of that for the next, that's May 21st. The last thing that I want to do is I do want to bring Miss Roxanne. You guys give Roxanne a hand. She loves the spotlight so much. We brought her up here twice, 2 weeks in a row. And Roxanne is our kids associate. She helps with Shani. Shani's not here. She's our kids pastor, and she had surgery on Thursday. Is that proper? And she's resting right now. But I wanted to bring Roxanne down here and also invite Aaron and Fred Proctor. Come on down. And many of you guys know that a few months ago we announced that Shani had felt God calling her to step out of the position as our kids director. And as much as I was annoyed at her and frustrated at her, shortly thereafter, Fred and Roxanne's not going to say anything. I asked her if you wanted to speak, and she said no. She has 9. How many babies in the room back there? 7 babies. They're all crying. So she's taking a break from the crying babies for a minute, but just to support Aaron and Fred. And so shortly after Shani said that, we were like, what are we going to do? And Aaron and Fred showed up to 704. And if you've met them, you know that they're just great people. They got plugged in right away, started. What's up?
We've got you fooled.
We've got it. Yeah, they've got us fooled. So we'll see how this goes. But we talked with Aaron. We interviewed a couple times. I've been talking with our elders and our staff about, hey, there's a potential new kids director for our kids ministry. And through the process, we offered Aaron the position, and she starts tomorrow, which is awesome. And what I want to invite you guys to is we're going to pray over her as she starts. It's a big deal. We have 7 crying babies back there. We need to get back to them. You're starting today, actually. I'm just kidding. She's actually already been serving back there and checking it out. But one of the pieces I want to say before we pray, one of her questions, a concern, was, hey, we're kind of new to 704. And we just showed up. I don't want people to be like, oh, they just showed up. And now they're in staff and doing all this. And this is what my conviction about who I want this church to be. Is that if you show up here day one and you go, hey, I'd love to serve. Hey, I feel this calling in my life to be a part of this ministry. I want to say, we want to find a spot for you. Her and Fred showing up was the perfect time because we needed a new kids director. And for any of you that have been a part of this church, you go, hey, this is something like, let us know because there's lots of space. We talk about it with our staff all the time. We want to make space for new people. You don't know how to play the bass guitar, but you want to. We have a team that would love to develop you. You've never served with kids, but you might be interested. Check it out. Maybe I'm called to preach. Whatever the thought is, we would love to identify that and help develop it, because the only way that the church, in my mind, becomes the most effective is when all the people that are a part of the church are actively learning and growing in their gifting and then using them. And maybe it's a gift that's not on a Sunday. I don't see where my gift works on a Sunday. I go, okay, well, there's 6 other days of the week that your gift can work in wonderful ways. And so I just want to point that out because they are relatively new, but if you've met them, a lot of us have hung out with them. They're also relatively awesome. And so more than that, and we are very excited for her to step in. Shani's actually going to be staying on to help transition for the next 2 weeks, and then they're sticking around. We have some other cool things that we would love to tell you about in the future about Shani's future involvement. But I'm going to pray over Aaron and Fred, and would you, as a church community, as one body, the scripture says, would you extend a hand and pray over them with me? God, we thank you for the ways that you are working when we don't see it. The ways that you brought Aaron and Fred here, and the ways that you prompted Shani to take a step away. And God, we just trust you when we can't see what's happening and maybe we're frustrated or confused. God, you are always at work. That's Romans 8:28, is that you work for the good of those who love you and are called according to your purpose in everything. God, this is a great thing. You've entrusted us with so many kids and so many families. It's a big responsibility, but God, I pray that you would fill Aaron right now. I would pray that you would be with Fred and Aaron in their marriage as she steps into this role and takes this responsibility. God, would you give her wisdom? Would you give her courage and compassion? Would you give her health and strength to be able to do this job well and care for parents well to invest in this next generation of the church. God, we thank you so much for this time, and we trust that when we speak, you listen and you hear from heaven. And so, God, thank you. We ask all this in your name. Amen. We are going to be in Luke chapter 6. Did I miss any announcements? Okay, good. You did great drumming, by the way. That's good. Question before we get into it, because I know you all want to say bring out the book. And if you don't, you should. I'm wearing one of our church shirts to preach in, and as I put it on this morning, one, you can get them, 704 Church Shop. This is not a way for us to make money. I think we make like 42 cents a shirt if you buy them. Go to our website, there says shop. I actually asked Terry to make a long sleeve one because I like long sleeve shirts. Is it tacky to preach in your church shirt? Because I've always seen, I'm like, oh, that pastor's wearing the church shirt. That's super cool, and now I'm doing it. But I just stinking love this shirt, so I'm like, whatever. You think it's tacky? Whatever. I love it. So this is a cool one. And it has the lion in it. We were like, lion and the lamb. I was like, lion and the lamb. Anyways, we're going to be in Luke chapter. I had to ask. We're going to be, I'm Thaddeus, by the way. If I haven't met you yet, I get to be lead pastor, at least for today. And I want to jump into the word. We do this thing where we yell, bring out the book, because we're here to worship God and not worship a preacher or a band or even a team, but we want to honor the one who authored this word and translated it and passed it down to us. And so I'm going to count us down, and you can yell, bring out the book, and then we praise God. So 3, 2, 1. Bring out the book! Thank you, God. Amen, amen, amen. We are in Luke chapter 6, verse 37. And I read from the NIV. The words will be up on the screen. If you don't have a Bible, there's a billion translations on your phone. And we also have Bibles at the 2 tables. If you would like to grab one and keep it, we would love to give that to you. Luke chapter 6, verse 37. Last week we had the great talk of loving your enemies, doing good to those who hurt you, and praying for those who persecute you, and even the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And as I was preparing it, I realized that these first 2 verses are probably a tag from that last week. But I want to read them, just the first 2 verses. Verse 37 of chapter 6 says, "Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven." Positively, give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. I notice we talk a lot about Jesus' commands. It's been a theme for a while. And I think here he's not commanding, but he's instructing. Hey, if you don't judge, you won't be. If you don't condemn, you won't be. He then says forgive, which I would interpret if it's a negative. If you don't hold grudges against people, people won't hold grudges against you. And even the Father, he talks about this in other places. And I think this is a clear connecting to that loving enemies piece. You think about all of those words that are huge, of judging and condemning and forgiving. One, for the first century audience, they would have been things that are going to happen on that day when Christ returns. He's going to judge, he's going to condemn, he's going to forgive. But it's also this invitation that, hey, there's a lot of hard situations. And as I was like studying it this week, I go, maybe it's perfect that we have kind of a PS from Jesus about love your enemies. Hey, by the way, I know it's hard, but don't judge, or you'll be judged. Don't condemn, or you'll be condemned. Forgive. Even when it's the most impossible thing to do, I implore you. And then he says, give. Instead of holding stuff against other people, church, give generously to them. And I love the picture that he paints when he says give. He says, give and it will be given to you. And then he says a good measure, right? So like a big pour. And then he says press down. That you literally can, like you press down, you're measuring flour for that cake that we're going to build, like Sharon talked about, and you push it in there to make sure that it's actually a cup and it's not fluffy. What does it say? Press down, shaken together. When I was in college, we would go get slushies at the gas station. And we were on budgets. I'm still on one. Well, you know what we would do is we would fill up the Slurpee, whatever you call them, and then we would bang it on the table for like 5 minutes to get another inch of room so we could put some more. And then if you were like really, hungry and budgeting, you kept doing it. It's shaking it down so that it's getting more and more. And then what does it say? Running over. That's the surface tension of water. You've seen that where you can fill up a cup over the line because see how much you can get in there until it's running over. And then what does it say? Will be poured into your lap. However hard these situations are that you're in, maybe you don't remember last week and you've just blurred it all out. It's loving enemies. It's really hard. Give to them. Give of yourself to them. And the promise here in Scripture from the King himself is it'll be dumped into your lap in the same measure that you're giving it away. It's a good reminder. Jesus then gets into 4 parables. And we're going to look at 2, and they are all for the reader to understand hyperbole. Hyperbole is an exaggeration to make a point. They're also all parables. They were things that probably would have been possible, but maybe weren't specifically about a real instance of something happening. And we're going to look at 2 of them today. We'll look at 2 of them next week. And they're all around this idea of how we treat other people. Because Jesus is saying last week, hey, love your enemies, do good to those that are against you. But then I think this week and next week he's going to say, so how do you deal with the people that you're actually in love with? How do you deal with the people that are kind to you? And he talks about 4 of these hyperbolic parables. And the first one is going to be the blind leading the blind. He then talks about splinters and planks. And the next week we will look at the tree and its fruit, and then a foundation and the builder of a house on that foundation. So we'll look at these 2 this week. If you want to look at verse 39, we will jump right into it. I feel like I'm missing something. Was I supposed to? We didn't do 4 minutes of family. Whatever. The introverts, you're welcome. Am I missing anything? All right. I'm good. I feel like, okay. Anyways, verse 39. He also told them this parable. Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into a pit? The student is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. So looking at these 2 verses, one, we need to know that there were lots of blind people in the ancient world. Not like everybody, but if you think about it, of the different ways that blindness can come on. I didn't know all of these, but people can be born blind, we know that. But then also there's infection like trachoma or leprosy, which we read about in the Scripture, that can cause blindness. You also think about old age with cataracts and atrophy. Those can lead to blindness as well. And then you take that and then you couple it with the quality of treatments in the ancient world 2,000 years ago. My grandmother, who texts me every Sunday morning, just had to sell her car because she can no longer drive because of cataracts in her eyes. It's one of those things, but there's treatment for her because we're in 2023. And some of you sitting out there are, quote unquote, blind as a bat without your glasses on right now. So think about an ancient world where all of these similar things that can lead to blindness today, plus no corrective lenses, plus no LASIK surgery, plus all these sorts of infections and salves to fix them. I mean, one thing I read was that they would try and remove like blisters from around the eyes to see if that would help. And so there were blind people walking around, and when he says fall into a pit, there were a lot of pits too. And this is an interesting thing. You think like, why were there just like random, it's like my kids play that Zelda game where you've got to go through the potter's field and there's all these holes and you like fall into them all the time, and our controller's old, so it accidentally goes up all the time, and I just laugh at my son when he falls into the pit like 7 times in a row, and I'm like, you're so bad at this game. And he's like, shut up, Dad. So what you need to know contextually is that they lived in an arid climate, and water was a valuable resource, and what people would do is that they would dig holes down in the ground to try and find water. And sometimes they were successful, and other times they weren't, and most times they didn't fill in the holes whether they were successful or not. So Jesus is painting a very real picture that's hyperbolic parable. Could you imagine, laughing maybe, a blind person leading another blind person, and in this area with all the holes? what would happen? They'd fall in the pit. And seriously, on a serious note, if you fell in one of these dry pits, they were deep, and you would likely seriously injure yourself and or die. Because that doesn't make any sense. No well-thought-out blind person's ever going to lead another blind person, and the blind person's definitely not going to let someone that's blind lead them. It's a very real situation that would have been humorous, but it paints the picture. He then concludes with a synopsis of the student-teacher. This is how they're connected. He says the blind person can only be as safe as the blind person that's leading them. He says the student isn't above the teacher. What does he say in verse 40? Everyone who's fully trained will be like their teacher. And this can be in a very positive way or in a very negative way. And one of the first things that I want to draw out, because this is a key thing, I didn't see it when I first looked at the text, but a lot of the commentaries and sermons that I've read talk about this, is one really key application for this text is to beware of false teachers. In the church, false leaders in your life, people who are not leading you towards biblical truth and wisdom, to be cautious of them. I watched a video, it's on my little Facebook feed. This pastor got up and he said, last week I misspoke. I said, this chapter was the most significant day for the church, but I misspoke because the resurrection was. And then he had this great thing. He said, Jesus is perfect, I'm not. The scriptures are authoritative, but I'm not. And he said, church, I implore you, when stuff like this comes up, to be not just hearers, but study the word, to look into it. You could think of 1 Thessalonians. So what do we do? How do you handle false teachers? If Jesus is saying, don't let the blind, you guys are thinking, maybe, Fennig, you're blind. Maybe you're leading us and we don't know what your vision is like. There's 3 passages I want to point to. If you take notes, you should jot these down, because I think this is helpful for us as a community, particularly around spiritual leadership, spiritual teaching. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 19 says, do not quench the spirit. Do not treat prophecies with contempt, but test them all. Hold on to what is good, reject every kind of evil. Or additionally, 1 John chapter 4, verse 1, dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. And John then says, this is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. Matthew 7, verse 15, watch out for false prophets. They look nice, like sheep, but they're wolves. So, when this says to be careful of false prophets, and some, if we were to summarize these, I would say don't quench, but avoid cynicism, but test it all. Don't just believe anything, test it all. Keep your eyes peeled. There'll be people that seem really kind, but there are wolves underneath, or if you would like it in Russian, doverye no proverye. Does anybody know what that means? Ronald Reagan made it really popular in the 80s. It's a Russian phrase, which means trust, but verify. It rhymes in Russian, so that's why it's a cool saying. But he says this, Reagan used it a lot in the 80s for relations with Soviet Russia, especially a nuclear conversation and Cold War stuff. It says, hey, we're going to trust, but we're going to verify. Doverye no proverye. You know what it means now. I give you Hebrew and Greek and Russian lessons sometimes. Niet, that's another Russian word, I think. And this is what I would implore you, church, is to trust me, to trust the church, to trust our leadership, but verify. Follow the commands of those scriptures to avoid cynicism. Don't everywhere you go be like, they're out to get me. That's not a healthy way to live. But at the same time, don't believe everything that you hear. One of my personal practices is that I'll read a book, any book, with anybody. Because I think I'm at a certain age and spiritual maturity where I can handle certain texts that I fully disagree with, but I can read them and understand them and really get another side. But I don't suggest that for everybody. Because some people, you sit down and you read a book and you're like, this is the best thing I've ever read. I'm going to start applying this to my life. And it's full of terrible ideas. So what we need to be as a people is trusting but not verifying. And I was thinking about this, like what if every Sunday when we left here, on your drive to lunch or back at your homes, whether you're single or with a family, you actually like reread the passage. If you took notes, which you should. Like, hey, what about this? How did this sit? And this is a new thing I hadn't really heard. Are there really a lot of holes in the first century? Is he making that up? Blindness really a thing back then? Talks about like false teachers, like what have we been learning in our church? And is this something that is in line with the truths of God's word or not? Like if we were a community that every week would take even 15 minutes to go through those things, and maybe for some of you longer, how much stronger would you be as a community? Amen? It'd be great. So, dover yea, no prover yea. I want you to know, too, this talks about being led by blind people if you can't see. And I want you to think about, as a church level, because we are all one body, is one of the things we say about our church structure is that we're staff-led but elder-directed. Just so you know. If you take Life Track, you would know that, too. And what it means is that the elders protect me, and then I'm supposed to lead our staff, and then our staff lead other leaders, and the leaders lead other people. And even if you think about hiring Aaron Proctor as our kids director, was months of us talking about it. She first applied. I think Shani actually first suggested her, and then I mentioned her to some of our elders, and then I said, hey, try and get to know this family because we want to figure it out. We don't want to be foolish as we lead. It's not me being like, you'd be a great kids director. That'd be a blind person doing it, right? Is that I know I'm 39 and I know that I have so much to learn, and if I go, hey, I'm just going to charge through, hopefully we never present any significant decision to you as a church family without months of conversations with our elders and then our staff and then even the leaders in our church to say, hey, be prayerful for this. Would you get to know them? Would you get to think about how this decision would have its ramification? I remember years ago, one of my friends said, what would it be like if you didn't have an elder board? And my answer was like, it'd be like going up a flight of stairs without legs. Like I could make it, maybe, but it would take me forever, and I would be exhausted, and I wouldn't know what I was supposed to do when I got to the top, because how do you go downstairs without legs, right? You just roll. And it's this picture of like we try and do the structure, but again, we are not flawless as a community. I want to challenge you as individuals. I think particularly for the teenagers in the room, for the young adults. Yeah, I'm looking at you, teenagers. I saw somebody who's like, huh, me? Is that oftentimes we can think that we can figure life out and that adults are naive and they don't really get us or anything like that. But Jesus is saying really clearly here that if you're just hanging out with other like-minded individuals, you are the blind leading the blind. When I was single out of college, we had this phrase that we didn't want to pool our ignorance, right? It's like, hey, it's like my daughter a couple years ago was talking to me about her plans for marriage. She was 6. I was like, yeah, what do you want to do? She's like, well, I'm never moving out. And I go, okay. And then she's like, and then I'll marry you. And I was like, sweetie, that's really cute. It's not going to happen. Like, I'm married to your mom. Like, we can both be married to you. I don't. And I'm like, where will you sleep? And she's like, I'll sleep on the bunk bed. Like, I'm staying there. Right? It's interesting, right? Like 6-year-olds talking about marriage plans to each other is silly, but it paints a picture. One of the things that I've been blessed with is people saying, hey, you don't know it all, because maybe I needed to hear that a lot. And so when I was in college, I took some buddies of mine and I said, who's one of the wisest Christian men that we know? And we asked him if he'd lead us in a Bible study for a semester, and he did. So this is a picture of me and some friends and Jay Kessler and Janie Kessler. I'm in the middle, by the way. Shaggy hair, don't care. This is like 2006, so I'm chunky? I'm not in the blue shirt. I'm in the yellow. I'm not chunky. Yellow shirt? Whatever. I'm wearing my own church's t-shirt. I'm chunky in college. But this is Jay and Janie Kessler. He was the president of my university for years. He was the chancellor and a pastor at like 3 churches at the time. Wonderful man. And willingly said, I'll hang out with you, sort of rebellious, somewhat wise kids. And actually gave me one of the best pieces of advice that led me to meet my wife and then led me to move back here. After college, I said, Jay, I don't know where I want to go. I could have stayed in Indiana. I had a teaching gig lined up. I could have moved back to Alabama where my parents are and lived with them. And you know what he said? He said, well, if you stay in the South or in the Midwest, it's easy to be a Christian. Because I think you need to go somewhere where it's hard to be a Christian. And I had friends that invited me to move to California. And he goes, in California, it's hard. Because the current of culture is towards Christianity out here. He goes, out there, everything's against it, and you'll really have to figure out what your faith was. He's like encouraging me to challenge my faith, and I'm like, I'm going to tell my mom that Jay told me I should go, But it was this vital thing. And so, friends, whatever your age is, don't be led by blind people. Find someone that's older and further along than you in your journey. That something you could even jot down is just find an older. I see all of our young adults sitting right here. Don't strategize amongst ourselves about the best plan for something in 10 years. Find somebody who's been there. Don't let the blind lead the blind. I think about that as age, whether you're a teenager or a young adult. Even just the fact that our kids' ministry, we are trying to instill in our kids certain things about who they are in Christ and who we are as the church. And one of the things that I love is their heart for service. I don't want my kids to ever think that it's mom and dad's church. We have that VIP program, and my 10-year-old loves helping out with kids with special needs. It brightens every day of his week at school when he goes. And what's going to happen when they're the next church, because that's what they're going to be once we're older, they're going to be the church, is that they're going to have a heart for service and an understanding of what their giftings are, because they are not saying, hey, what do you guys think we should do? We're saying, hey, this is a good thing for you to practice and learn. Even our own kids, we do the Dave Ramsey thing. Save 10, give 10, pray about the 80. So every time they get anything, even birthday money, like we're kind of mean about it. Like you just got $10 for your 10th birthday, like $1 goes to church, $1 goes to saving, pray about the 8. And he's like, I have to give God from my birthday money? And I go, yes. But then I tell you what, like if they do this rhythm of service in the church, of giving financially, by the time they're 18, it's going to be a habit. They're not even going to think about it. And I would say for us as individuals, wherever you are, whether you're like a newly married or going through a marriage issue, or maybe you're starting a new job, find an older. Find someone that's been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and say, hey, would you walk with me? Because this is a challenging thing, or maybe it might be challenging and I don't know exactly what to do. It's interesting because Jesus is talking about a vision around blindness. You notice that? The blind lead the blind. You can't become any further than your teacher. You'll fall into a hole. He then gets into probably the better known parable in verse 41. Remember, this is hyperbole and it's a parable. These are extremes. Look at verse 41. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when you failed to see the plank in your own eye? Like Jesus has to be chuckling. And the audience would have been like, like roaring with laughter. You all are like, I don't see how that's funny. You hypocrite. That word's rich in the Greek. First take out the plank from your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. One of the things that I've started to do to try and become a better teacher is to read the Greek. And it's interesting. In the Greek, there's 2 words that come up. And this is a 4x4. And this is the word for plank is the word dokon. Can you say dokon? That's the bottom one. And it literally means, I was looking it up because there's a really interesting point about what this is. It's actually getting heavy, but I'm going to muscle it up. I'm going to put it on my shoulder. It means a large piece of wood. I don't want to hit something. It's hard to not hit anything with holding a large beam. See what I did there? And then this is a splinter of wood. The Greek is karphos, which means a small piece of wood. What is Jesus saying? He goes, if you have a beam. John, will you come up here? You've been up here enough. Chelsea, come up here. Do you want to do the beam or the splinter?
I'll do the beam.
All right, I'll hold it. You put it like kind of as your eye. No. Like hold it so you have it makes sense that you would choose the beam, if you know what I mean, guys. All right, so me and Chelsea are she's like, hey, and I've got this splinter in my eye. It's even small. I'm going to make it smaller than this. Let's just imagine. And so if Chelsea were to be like, hey, let me get that splinter out of your eye, what's she going to have to do?
Hit you.
Try and come get the splinter out. Right? It's going to bust me. Is it getting a little heavy? Right? But what happens is that two really beautiful things, and then I'll let you sit down. Can you hold it for another second? Two things that this picture is about. The first one is about being led by blind people. You can't go further than your teacher, but notice how close can Chelsea and I get when it comes to a difficulty? Not close. And what does a splinter and a beam have in common? They're both wood. So, two beautiful things that come up from Jesus now saying, this is how you handle people having difficulties. I do want to say this too. He doesn't say, only call other people out when you've perfected it. Because then we would never call anyone out for anything ever. Amen? The saying is not preach what you practice. It's not preach only what you've perfected. What is the saying? Practice what you preach, meaning that there are some things that you need to tell other people about, and you're not going to be perfect at it, but you better be working on it. This is the thing that I love. This picture about how we relate to other people has two really key things. And one is it's about proximity. The second one, it's about similarity. Proximity is really clear. Chelsea held the plank up, the beam. You could think joist. Jesus is using the biggest piece of wood that would have been used for foundations of buildings. And he's like, and comparing it to a speck, the smallest piece of wood that you can hardly see. And what he's saying is about proximity is that for you to actually be close enough to see the speck, you have to get rid of the plank or the joist in your own eye. But I tell you what, many of you can't even see this speck right now, but could you all see the plank in Chelsea's eye? And one of the things that's funny is that if Chelsea were to try and tell me about the splinter, she might be like, hey, there's a splinter in your eye. And I'm like, what? Come close. She's like, I can't. I got this plank, I'm like, hey, there's a splinter. Like you've got to be so far away. Because what he's getting at is that we have to, particularly in the church and definitely with neighbors and co-workers and co-commuters and classmates, to live this life of loving enemies, and then when we see things, call them out. But I need to tell you that if you are not in close proximity to that person, it's going to fall on deaf ears. You've been the recipient of it, and you've probably been the perpetrator of it. You've received someone being like, I need to tell you about a sin in your life. I need to tell you about something and you go, who are you? They knew your name, but they didn't know anything about you. I've done it. I remember in college, I tried to call this one guy out, and he kind of got in my face and wanted to fight me. And I was like, I was just being a good Christian man, But I didn't know anything about his life. So one, it's about proximity. It's impossible for Chelsea to properly be close enough to remove this splinter from my eye without first removing her own. But it's not just about proximity, friends. It's also about similarity. This was fascinating. That oftentimes, the splinters that we see in other people's eyes are made of the same material, but in a much larger degree in our own eyes. N.T. Wright, not that quote, but N.T. Wright says that they're called projections. That we often easily identify things in other people that we struggle with ourselves. I've been told, and I know this, that I struggle with arrogance in my life. I tell you what, the most annoying people to me, people that are arrogant. And my wife is always like, honey, you are too. And I'm like, no, but I'm right here. I'm like being arrogant in my judgment of this person's arrogance, But it's this beautiful piece to think about. What people criticize in others is frequently, though not always, subconsciously something they're not happy about and maybe even afraid of in themselves. So Jesus is first saying, hey, don't let the blind lead the blind. Find a good teacher. But then he's saying, when things come up, make sure that you're in close relationship with them and make sure first That you're dealing with your own joists in your eyes, your own beams, your own planks. Because the end of the story ends with, but take the splinter out. There is a splinter there after all. It's hurting their vision. But make sure that you're addressing your joist, your beam, your plank first. I think as a church, too, if we apply this, we can critique other churches while our own church is not perfect. Remember one of the pastors that I respect a lot was asked about this pastor who had been kind of doing some shady stuff. And they go, what do you think about this guy's church? And he's like, that's an interesting question. There's things about his church I don't like. And then he's looking across him and he goes, there's things about your church I don't like. He goes, there's things about my own church I don't like. And so what this can often lead to as a church, as a group, but even as leaders and staff, is that we can look at other churches and critique them. And if we're not careful, one, we don't know them. There's a large church down the street around here, and actually down the other street and the other street. They're like on every street. And when we first moved here, people would compare us to them. When are you going to be like that? How are you not going to be like that? You look like their pastor. It's like, okay. And one of the things that's been a rich thing is there's a group called For Charlotte that connects churches together. And I get to sit with other pastors once a month. And one of the pastors from this large church goes there. And we've had coffee and hung out a couple times. And the more I get to meet people in leadership in that church community, the more I go, they're just like me. They just have a different picture of how the church should function. I mean, the last time I met this guy at Raw Crunch Coffee in Indian Trail, which I had never been, and I'm an ITer, so I'm like, you don't show me places, I show you places. And we show up, and I'm going to get there, and he's like, hey, can we meet like 30 minutes earlier, because the pool's finally warm enough, and I'm going to go do some cannonballs with my kids. And I'm like, we don't even need to meet. Go, can I do cannonballs with you? Like, he's a real dude. He's not a robot. He doesn't have this ulterior motive that some of us think about the megachurch in that way. And one of the things that we have to be careful of is that we can often be like, I hate how they do this, but then we actually do it in part. And we definitely aren't close enough with any of them to say anything. I've talked to my friend about his vision of the church and about how I view our church and how his church is different than our church. And I go, I respect it, but this is where my heart's at. And he listens and he shares his heart. And if there's ever anything that I see, I could actually talk to him about it because we have proximity. At another level, when we consider our own church, we can focus on splinters at the detriment of addressing the planks. In a silly way, we can argue about the color of the carpet. That's a funny one that I've never been a part of a church that's argued and fought over the colors of the carpets, but it's happened. Mine was over the placement of the piano. This side or this side. It was a big fight. Like legitimately big fight. I was a kid. The quality of the donuts or the quantity of the coffee. We get to more serious things that we can argue over, finer points and sillier things that we can argue over. Whatever the level is, that if we're not careful, the saying is that we can miss the forest for the trees. We can focus on all of the nitpicky things. This is one of the great quotes of N.T. Wright, if they're going to put it up. He says, many churches make a huge fuss, I love that word, about small details, while the main point of the gospel and of radical Christian witness in the world is missed altogether. I want to say this to this community, is that I don't see this as something that I'm like, I need to preach this sermon because you're making a big fuss. What I see is men and women who are, again, still trying to get the splinters out, but first making sure the planks are out. We want to be a church that talks about the gospel. We want to be a church that does mission in the world. We want to be a church that's growing deeper and healthier in our personal relationship with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and in relationship with other people. How can we be on mission all together? But I think it's still a good reminder that if we're not careful, so a couple weeks ago we ran out of donuts. And I don't think anybody complained. We laughed about it. Because if we run out of donuts, that means we have a lot of guests, and that's a good thing. Like, it's good for people to show up to church. But my kids, they complained about it. You know? And I'm like, you're focusing on the splinter, child. You know, I didn't say that at all. And not just with gospel and mission, but like, what is our mission in the world? Is it, I read this book by James Cone. And he has this quote that they're going to put up on the screen that was cut me to the heart. He said, while churches are debating whether a whale swallowed Jonah, the state is enacting inhuman laws against the oppressed. And some of you were like, hold on. It was a whale. I think if we're not careful, we can spend all of our time debating theology instead of living out ecclesiology. Ecclesiology means, what is the church supposed to be? How do we function in the world? How do we do the stuff that we're supposed to do as the living temple that the Spirit is indwelling? But we love to just debate theology and finer points that are not salvific, meaning it doesn't save you. I do want to say this, though, because some of you are squirming that details matter. I just want to remind you, in the end, get the splinter out. It's great to have those conversations. And I don't know if you've ever heard me say this before, but it feels worth saying. Sometimes people will ask me my position on certain things. I was talking with a friend about the book of Revelation, which some of you are like, you should preach that. And I'm like, no, because I'm not smart enough. And I know some of you are like, come on. I have to study it for like 5 years before I even read the first verse. The first verse is pretty nice. It's like chapter 5 where it gets messy. I always ask myself the question, and I challenge people with this question, is based on your conviction and your belief, because right theology matters. I'm not going to say that it doesn't matter what you believe. I was just talking to a new couple this morning in church. They're like, what's your denomination, right? It matters. My question for myself and my question for you is, how are you living today because of your conviction on this point of theology? So you believe in a certain view of eschatology, or a new word I'm trying to fully understand called dispensationalism. You believe in a literal whale, or you don't, and you believe in this for creation. You believe in this for all of these other things. How are you living on mission now? All of that stuff matters. All of that stuff will be found out in the end when we see God face to face. But for right now, if we're not careful, we're picking up splinters left and right, putting them on a little pedestal and be like, look at all these cool splinters I have, when we're walking around with like double beams just knocking everybody else out. It's about proximity and similarity. I want to say this too because I think it's worth it. That you know what isn't commanded here is that when you see a splinter to then go and talk to someone else about it. I was talking to people recently and just like, hey, the whole gossip thing, the psalmist says that it's like a dainty morsel. It's like if I showed you your favorite candy bar and I'm like, hey, come up and smell it, but don't bite it. Be like, no, but just a little bit. That's what happens when you hear, like, have you heard about so-and-so? And you're like, no, it's gossip. I don't want to hear it. And you're like, tell me a little bit. I'll hold it. I'll be okay. Matthew 18 is what some of you might need to read, because there are conflicts. There are things, splinters that you're going to see, and maybe you are not in proximity. You go, well, I'm not close enough to this person. I don't know how to do it, but I've seen the splinter. I somehow caught a glimpse of it, and I know that something needs to be said. Matthew 18 is one of the best passages for that, and if we could follow this perfectly, we would be better. Matthew 18, verse 15 says that if someone sins, that you go to them one-on-one. You call it out and you just say, this is what I see. If they don't listen, you go 2-on-1. Bring a few with you. People from the church that are in agreement. If they don't listen to that, bring them before the church, Jesus says. And then I love that he says if they don't do that, for years I thought it meant like cast them out. But what does he say in verse 17 is treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Meaning that's your mission. You need to show them the love of Jesus. If they're a pagan, it means they don't believe in Jesus at all. If they're a tax collector, it means they kind of follow God, but they're working for the enemy. Whatever it is, wherever the conflict is, he doesn't say, it's great to talk about splinters that other people have to other people. He says, go, but we'll look at your plank, look at your joist. But we still need to get the splinters out. I want to share a little bit about how, I mentioned before the arrogance thing of how I wrestle with that. I want to confess too, I don't know if it's huge. It might be, I can't believe that. One of the things that I feel like I've maybe done the splinter and plank or even not leading well is that we talk a lot about prayer. I talked about this publicly on the National Day of Prayer because I'm there with an hour and a half with 60 other pastors from 30 other churches. It was an awesome time to pray for our city. And right away, it's like, what do you need to repent of? I was there with Robin, and I was like, I talk about prayer a lot, And I encourage you to pray, and I'll pray for you on Sundays. I'll pray for you if you ask during the week, but my personal life of prayer hasn't been as built out as it should be. And sometimes we need to be able to talk about the ways that we can be like, oh, you got to pray about it. You got to pray about it. You really need to develop this culture of prayer, but then we're not doing it ourselves. Because maybe the thing that I'm wanting them to develop in themselves, I'm also feeling that I need to develop it in me. It's a way that I've been a perpetrator of this on the wrong end, but we've also all done that in some degree, have we not? I told my kid the other day not to use a harsh voice with his siblings in a harsh voice. Stop talking to your sister like that. It's so mean. And he's like, you know? But we've also been victims. I remember, and sometimes these are very hard. I remember we had a conflict between two people in our church, and it was messy, and it was over social media, which I was just like, everybody get off social media forever. And no joke, I pray about it, I journal about it, I'm like pros, cons, like doing all these things. I go walk and I'm praying like a few days and hours. And I reach out to the person and I say, this is what I think, and he didn't agree with it. And then a friend of his called me. Do you know what they said? Did you even pray about it? I was like, I just felt the physical plank. You aren't close enough to me to know anything about who I am if you would ask that question. Because in that season, I'd taken the time to do all of these different pieces. And I didn't feel the reason to justify it and explain all the process. Be like, I've spent days and hours, and it's hard, and I care about both of them, and I care about this guy, and I'm telling him that he's wrong, and he needs to apologize and move on. And she was just like, did you even think about it? I think another one 3 years ago now, we went independent as a church. And we've now been able to tell the story, but it started like with COVID. And one of my bosses mentioned it as an idea because they were changing things in the church. And it was one of those, I jokingly say, it's one of those scenes in a movie where like the person's moving and then the background like zooms out. When she said the words, I was like, I hadn't thought about that at all. This is like March. We meet every week. It's like very, very rapidly happening. I'm meeting with our elders at the time, and I'm meeting with my two bosses, the lead pastor and executive pastor. Like every week we're having these meetings, and it's really, really hard. And then my elders are like half and half. We had 4 other guys, and 2 of them were like, we should stay. 2 were like, let's get out. I'm already gone. And we keep praying, and we keep trying to figure out the best thing to do. And ultimately, we get to the spot where we're like, hey, we think God is telling us that it's good for us to go independent. We tell my former Rock Harbor leadership, and they go, we're surprised, but we want to support you. They're super gracious, like gave us lots of money, gave us like all of this equipment is actually theirs. Like they did so much for us, but they go, hey, we're dealing with a lot. If you remember, it was COVID, and there was also the race stuff going on, and they go, could you not announce this to anybody because we don't want to have to deal with more problems on our end? And I go, sure, tell me when. And they're like, June. So I sat on it. Our elders sat on it for like a month. And when we announced it, some people were like, I wish you would have told us because we could have been praying. But I had somebody say, how long have you been planning this? And I just felt the beam. I was like, do you think that I've been planning this for years? You think that I've been like manipulating situations for years? Where then at the right time that we would do this type of decision? And so I want you to know that wherever you are, there's times when we've perpetrated this. You've not found a good lead. You've been led by someone that's a peer that doesn't have vision, and you're just pulling your ignorance. There's times when you've actually focused on people's splinters, and you've got beams and joists all over. You can't get close enough at all. You don't even know them or what's going on, and you're just shouting it out. But at the same time, I know that you've been victims of it. I've been trying to say, like, in my mind, what is the point that Jesus wants us to get out of this? And I think there's a couple. The main thing, though, is that I think it comes to the fact that we're communal beings. We're created in God's image, and God is forever Trinity, Father, Spirit, and Son. And when He makes us like Him, we are wired for other people. Whether you've been, maybe we have people watch online, and they're like, I do this because I don't want to be around other people. You're wired for other people. And when you come into a relationship with them, there's going to be stuff that comes up. You're going to need wisdom, and you're going to feel tempted to just follow other people that are similar to you. You're going to see problems in other people, but you're also going to have problems in your own life, and you need to actually make sure that you're doing work on yourself, not just focusing on everybody else's problems, because sometimes you're not close enough, and other times you're dealing with the same thing in a bigger way. And I think the invitation for us might be in any number of ways. First, and I would say this very compassionately because this is true of me, is that you've got work to do. You've got work to do. Maybe the whole time you've been listening to this and even rereading the text, you realize that it's a shot to the heart. That the Spirit is making you aware, I haven't been getting good wisdom from somebody older than me. I'm pretty sure I'm right, and I don't even want to listen to anybody that's older. I don't want to ask advice from anybody that's further down the road. I know what's best for me, and this person, they're just outdated. They don't know what's going on. Maybe you've got a joist and you've been picking at people's splinters. You've never even thought about how it could be the same material. Secondly, maybe you're here, and that's probably true, and you've got some apologizing to do. I think the invitation in this, when he says to forgive, and you'll be forgiven, is that sometimes you have to ask for forgiveness too. Maybe you've been going around and you've been picking up people's splinters left and right and calling them out and shouting at them, and you need to go up and be like, hey, I'm sorry for the way that I did that. Maybe you didn't actually go and do that. You talked to somebody else about other people's splinters, and you need to apologize to the person and say, hey, can you forgive me? I spoke out of line. I didn't follow Jesus' commands on how to deal with sin. I actually talked to somebody else, and I thought that I was doing it out of a good motivation, but it turned into something else. I'm sorry, and can you forgive me, and can we move on? I think I look around, though, and I think a lot of you guys have pretty good eyes. You're not blind. You're being led by people with better vision than you. You don't have any huge planks, at least ones that you're not aware of. You're aware of your own sin and your own flaws. And I want to challenge you that you don't just have good eyes, but you have a voice. And what would be best for someone with good eyes is to use the voice that God's given them to help other brothers and sisters, blood-bought brothers and sisters, as they're trying to navigate life. And even reading this passage, you're like, yeah, I know that I need to be close. There's people that you're close to that need your good vision. They will be better off for it. They'll live their life. They'll avoid the pits. They'll avoid the pain of a splinter and the embarrassment of a plank. They'll be able to live closer in a line with how God's designed them to live. So what I want to do is invite you to stand. If you're new, we worship. We got another song. I'm going to bring the band up. I wonder if wherever you're at with this, and if you're like, man, I just want to get out of here because I'm hungry, just give us like 10 more minutes. God, how do you want to move in us? The picture that came to mind are the people on the two extremes. It's the older person with wisdom that feels like nobody wants to hear from them. God, I pray for the people in here with good vision. For those with wisdom for those that have recognized their sin. That parable, or the story when the woman caught in adultery comes up and you say, whoever's without sin, cast the first stone. And this text says that the older people left first, because the older we get, the more that we're aware of our own sin. And so, God, I pray right now that you would minister to those that are older, that have been through life and are aware of their own sin, and are maybe wrestling on that end of like, I have a voice, I have good vision, but I don't know how to use it. I don't know what to say. I don't know in what avenue that would be. God, I pray that you would give them clarity. Just even right now, would you let them know that the community is better because they're a part of it? This church community, their neighborhood, their families, and give them the right words to say when they try and lead other people, when they teach, when they point out and help extract the splinters that people are carrying. I pray for the person on the other end. The younger, maybe in a spot where they think nobody really gets me, or all the older people that I've heard of have no clue what my life's like, or they're from a different generation. All of those things that I used to think when I was younger, and I still have a tendency to think now. God, I pray that you would meet them. I pray for an older man or an older woman, an older group of people to be able to, maybe even today, go up to them and be like, hey, we should hang out. To break that mindset that they're not willing to enter into that relationship, God. Wherever you are, I just want to invite you. We have a prayer team that will be in this middle aisle. If you need prayer for anything, would you come down and join us in worship?